There are moments in a person's life that arrive quietly, soft as a breath, almost invisible, and yet they split everything into a before and an after. For Art Garfunkel, one of the most unmistakable voices in modern music, that moment came later in life, long after he believed every storm had already passed him. He was 81 when he finally admitted the truth, but the story itself began much earlier, on a night he never saw coming. To most of the world, Art was the gentle half of a legendary duo. A voice light enough to float and strong enough to cut through whole generations of emotion. His singing seemed effortless, like something the universe whispered through him. But the universe has a way of testing the people it gifts the most. And the night his voice collapsed, everything he thought he knew about himself began to crumble with it. The voice that built a life. From the time Art was 5, before anyone knew what Simon and Garfunkel would one day become, he understood one thing with certainty. His voice wasn't just a talent. It was home. It was identity. It was the place he returned to when nothing else made sense. While other children chased baseballs, Art chased sound, smooth, high, bell-clear notes that came out of him with startling purity. Even as a teenager, people turned their heads when he sang, wondering how a boy could sound so weightless. And when Paul Simon stood beside him, their voices didn't blend, they merged. Two sounds becoming one, like twin flames flickering into a single light. Songs like Sound of Silence and Bridge Over Troubled Water didn't just make them famous. They carved their names into the bones of music history. But the truth about gifts, especially rare, fragile ones, is that we assume they will never abandon us. Until the day they do. The moment that changed everything. Fast forward to 2010. Art was 72, seasoned, calm, and carrying decades of applause behind him. He had survived fame, tension with Paul, the harsh glare of the spotlight, everything. And when the two decided to perform together again for a reunion tour, it felt like a final victory lap. Until New Orleans. That night he walked on stage the same way he had thousands of times before. Same lights. Same hum of the crowd. Same quiet confidence in the one thing that had never failed him, his voice. The music started. He lifted the microphone. And when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. Not the clarity. Not the effortless brightness. Not the sound that had carried him through continents and decades. What came out instead was a shaky, broken whisper. A voice that did not belong to him. In an instant, everything he had built for nearly 70 years felt like it was dissolving inside his chest. He tried again. Forced the note. Willed it into existence. But the mid-range he once glided through gone. The smoothness that defined him gone. The confidence shattered. He walked off stage shaken, confused, frightened in a way he had never been frightened before. The diagnosis followed. Vocal cord paresis, partial paralysis of a vocal fold. A singer's nightmare. A life-stopping sentence. And just like that, the future he expected disappeared. The collapse of a self. Most artists fear losing fame. Art Garfunkel feared something far more devastating. Losing the ability to sing meant losing the ability to exist as himself. Within days, he canceled the tour. Within weeks, he canceled everything else. He withdrew into silence, real, terrifying silence. The kind that doesn't comfort but echoes. He began referring to himself as Walter, a name he used to describe the version of himself that had no music. I became somebody named Walter, he said. And I didn't know how to be him. This wasn't a man having a bad year. This was a man grieving a death. The death of the person he had been his entire life. He avoided microphones. He avoided rooms where people expected him to sing. He avoided even casual humming because hearing the broken sound hurt too much. He said the loss felt like losing breath. And when you lose breath, you lose life. The private downfall no one saw. People saw less of Art during those months, but they didn't understand the depth of the unraveling happening behind closed doors. There were mornings he couldn't bring himself to try a single note. Afternoons where he replayed old performances just to remember what it felt like to have control. Nights where he lay awake, wondering if he was now just a man whose greatest gift existed only in archives. He feared the pity of others more than the silence. He feared the question, "Are you coming back?" He feared disappointing the fans who had carried him through countless eras of music. But the most painful fear was the one he rarely admitted out loud. What if the world only loved him because of a voice he no longer had? The first flickers of fight. Yet even in those darkest months, there was a pulse inside him, weak but insistent. The longing to sing. That longing became the candle he clung to when everything else went dark. And slowly, quietly, he began the hardest journey of his life, not a comeback, not a performance, but a rebuilding. He started alone. Whisper singing along to James Taylor. Murmuring with the Everly Brothers. Trying to mimic Chet Baker's softness. Sometimes a note came through. Sometimes only air. But he kept going. Because longing is a powerful thing. It can rebuild even what fate tries to take away. The empty hall and the friend who stood by. Practicing at home wasn't enough. Art knew that. He needed to face the very thing he feared most. A room. A microphone. A stage. But he didn't start with an audience. He started with a friend, Stuart Breed, his longtime engineer. Together they walked into an empty hall, the kind with rows of silent seats stretching out like ghosts waiting to judge him. He stood in the center. He lifted the microphone. And he sang. The sound bounced back at him, fragile, imperfect, trembling. Some notes cracked. Some notes vanished. Some landed, barely. But he stayed. He didn't run. He didn't disappear into Walter. He faced the emptiness head on. And bravery like that is its own kind of music. The first tiny audiences. Year 3. Art finally gathered the courage to sing in front of people again. Not in arenas, not in theaters, but in the safest place he could imagine. His wife's Buddhist circle. A few dozen people. Warm faces. No expectations. He stood there knowing he might fail in front of them. But they listened with something rare, patience. Those small performances were not about perfection. They were about reclaiming identity. Rebuilding confidence. Understanding the voice he had now, not the one he had lost. Later he tried a tiny art gallery, only 90 seats. 7 shows. No big lights. No spectacle. Just honesty. "Listen to me sing," he would tell them. "But I can't sing." The crowds didn't mock him. They leaned in. Because what they heard wasn't weakness. It was vulnerability. And vulnerability is a kind of courage most people never experience. The slow return of a miracle. By the 4th year, something unexpected happened. The voice began to return. Not like a dramatic movie climax. Not in one triumphant moment. But slowly, thin beams of light returning after a long blackout. One day he hit a mid-range note without strain. Another day, he felt the old resonance in his chest. Another day, the clarity flickered back. And then one afternoon, he sang a line and realized. It sounded like him. Later he said, "I feel 99% there." But the truth was deeper. He had earned that 99% one painful inch at a time. A new kind of performance. When he finally returned to big stages, he wasn't the same man he had been before 2010. He didn't chase perfection anymore. He chased connection. He told stories. He let himself be imperfect. He brought warmth instead of polish. Humility instead of showmanship. Honesty instead of invincibility. And for the first time, he wasn't singing to impress. He was singing to exist. The ghost of Simon and Garfunkel. Of course, the world never stops asking one question. Will Simon and Garfunkel reunite? Art's answer became gentler over time. It takes two to tango, he would say. Ask him first. Paul Simon, however, never softened. He said plainly, We don't get along. It's not fun. The chapter was closed. And Art accepted that. But he still carried memories like treasures tucked into his pocket. The old friends tour. The Everly Brothers watching from backstage. 2 voices. 1 guitar. Arena crowd sitting in odd silence. Who does that? He asked. 1 guitar, in an arena. Even the hardest relationships can leave behind beautiful echoes. While fans obsessed over the past, Art found himself looking toward something far more meaningful: his son. Art Garfunkel Jr. A young man with his own voice, his own dreams, but a spark of his father's tone threaded through his sound. He didn't run from the legacy. He embraced it. He explored German pop. Tried modern styles. Experimented with classical crossover. He wasn't seeking fame. He was building something sturdier: a long, slow, steady career. Watching him was healing. It reminded Art that music didn't end the night his voice broke. It continued through the next generation, through someone who had seen his father triumph, collapse, and rise again. And maybe that's why Art himself softened. Life had handed him a wound, but it also handed him a mirror, his own son, reflecting the continuity of something that once felt lost. The man he became. In his 80s, Art found a peace he never expected. He accepted that he would never sound like the young man who once stunned the world. And he no longer needed to. He spoke about vulnerability as if it were a companion. He talked openly about fear, about uncertainty, about performing without a safety net. You invite people to listen, he said. But you don't know if you can deliver. That's bravery without a net. Audiences didn't love him less for it. They loved him more. Because now he wasn't a flawless voice. He was a human being. He recalled childhood memories, like the sound of running a stick along a picket fence. And said he missed that sweet little guy, young Artie. Age had not hardened him. It had deepened him. Music was no longer the only anchor. Marriage. Fatherhood. Quiet routines. The simple beauty of surviving. These became the treasures he carried forward. And through it all, he never forgot one truth. I've been a lucky duck. Lucky to have risen. Lucky to have fallen. Lucky to have returned. Even if the return was imperfect. It was his. Art Garfunkel's journey is not just about music. It's about identity. About grief. About rebuilding. About finding the courage to keep going when the world only remembers the version of you that no longer exists. His story isn't a tragedy. It's a transformation. Because in losing his voice, he found something more powerful. A deeper understanding of what it means to be human. What about you? Which part of Art Garfunkel's journey moved you the most? The collapse? The comeback? The tenderness in old age? Tell us in the comments, your thoughts truly matter. And if you want more deeply human stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next.